Hello and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and with me today is Brett Vottero, who is the founding chairman of the St. Andrews Historical Society. Welcome to the show, Brett.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is so exciting that there is a historical society, and whose idea was this, and how did it begin?
Well, I think it began for me actually as a child. My mother, who was born and raised here, had one of the Francis Wren maps hanging in our house for a long time, the historical map where you can trace the history of St. Andrews, and it always interested me. And coming here every summer growing up, I really came to love the town. But I noticed as an adult coming that if you were just a casual visitor coming through the town, there wasn't really a place where you would get a sense of the history of the town, a plaque on Market Square, but more than that. So that's what led to the idea of let's try to establish some presence in the Water Street area for people to learn about our history.
I think it's fantastic, and I think I remember when the idea came into town, because it came in with the discovery that you made of the Treaty of 1760 in Massachusetts. So would you like to share a little bit of that story?
It's a wonderful story of serendipity because, you know, our founding purposes are fairly narrow. It's to research, collect, preserve, and make available information and materials about the history of St. Andrews. And importantly, to cooperate with the Pescataway Nation in researching and collecting and preserving and making available materials about the First Nations history. So those were our two primary purposes. And as we talked about our first event, how we wanted to begin, we were sure we wanted it to be focused on the First Nations because that's the most lengthy period of the history of this area. And one of our members said, wouldn't it be great if we could get one of the treaties of peace and friendship and have an exhibit? That would attract some attention. And I'm always up for a challenge, so I said sure, and began looking and couldn't find it anywhere. And online, checked all the archives and museums and found nothing until I saw a reference that the first treaty of 1725 was known as Doomer's Treaty for Acting Governor Doomer of Massachusetts. And a few minutes later, I was looking at not just the Treaty of 1725 in the Boston archives, but the Treaty of 1760, which was entered into with the Passamaquoddy and the Wolastoqey. And so that's how that journey began.
It's an amazing tale because there's so much emphasis on trying to have some more friendly relations with First Nations, which to me, coming from the U.S., is different because it wasn't a thing yet down there. Yeah. But I think that the fact that there is an appetite everyone is on side with this, which I think is great. And how does this historical society that you're forming, how is it going to coincide with, or what concentric circles will it have with the archives and with other organizations that are like the Civic Trust that are already they've carved out their spots?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I told you the two primary purposes. The third one is to support and cooperate with the Charlotte County Archives, the St. Andrews Civic Trust, and any other group that's focused on our history. And both of them do a really impressive job in their respective areas. You know, the archives materials and preservation and what they bring to the community is really, really impressive. And I'm not sure there are many small towns like St. Andrews that have had such a successful preservation and restoration program of the built heritage. So that the Civic Trust focuses and does it well on the built heritage of the town. The Archives does an excellent job on preserving the key documents. The piece that may be missing is a museum, a library, and somebody who's pulling together and sponsoring educational programs and making history both fun and interesting. And that's really what we're hoping to do, is to make it a source of pleasure as well as education.
Well, it is, it's really amazing the number of events that have transpired since, you know, the 1760s and now that people don't know about. And they're all very formative. And just the events that went around the treaty and its journey to Massachusetts was enough of a story. But there are many untold stories and many that haven't been brought to the surface. So there are a lot of people in the town. For instance, you mentioned the Wrens before. Well, you know, there are stories in the archives that talk about these people. And I know when I was doing research for the Windsor House, it was Pam Stewart found all kinds of stuff. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn about this. And are you planning to have regular hours or activities, or how will you get people involved in this society?
Well, we can't be more excited than we are right now, because we had hoped to be able to have some kind of presence on Water Street, and we're going to be having what I think of as an office, a reading room, and a small shop in the Windsor House, where the old barber shop was. And it's got us all excited at the possibilities of what we can do there. You know, dropping back to the treaty for just a minute, I found personally what was a real discovery there was how much I was learning in that one bit of study about how that treaty came to be, how it arrived in Boston, how much I learned about that area. And of course, that's what you want out of a historical society. But you're correct. The surface is just barely scratched in St. Andrews between businesses like cottage craft and the industry that's been here, as well as individuals, you know, people of daily life and colorful characters. There's just a lot that we can explore and share as we find it.
You know, the thing that just popped into my mind was there are a number of historic buildings, like let's just take the post office and the Beacon Press. Those have changed, you know, skin off like a caterpillar a number of times. And nobody knows the real stories about them because it's not easily accessed. I mean, you have to make an effort to find this information out, but lots of tourists come to the town and they want to know, well, what about this building? And where did that come from? And what's the significance of that? And why is the town plat a National Historic District? Yeah. That is a story unto itself.
It is, and we want to do two things. You know, when we have this little space open on Water Street, we're hopeful that it's a place where not just residents, but first-time visitors will stop in, and we'll be able to give them information, direct them, for example, to the jail and archives. You know, don't miss that. Don't miss Minister's Island, and give them the information about the houses you're talking about. The Platte is a wonderful example, too, because one of the first events that we're planning, hopefully sometime in February or March, is something we're calling a street party. And it's going to be informal, and hopefully we're going to serve some just dessert and coffee and free to the public. And by street party, it'll be a chance to learn a little bit about all of the people, all of the children of the king that these streets are named after. There's a fascinating story there, and we think with little brief presentations, it'll be a fun event.
I think that sounds like a great idea. It's great for a lot of reasons. People are going to learn something, and it brings the community together for a common reason. And there is a real appetite for that, especially in the winter when there's less to do and people tend to feel more isolated. And especially this may bring more seniors out, because seniors hold more information than non-seniors.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, because one of the things we are going to do, and we'll work with the archives on this, is do oral history. So the space that we have at the Windsor House is a beautiful fireplace, and what we picture is having some people with experience, whether you want to call them seniors or whatever, come in and allow themselves to be interviewed as part of oral history documentation. And there's some good guides for that from the Smithsonian Institution and others. And these are people with memories and knowledge that you want to capture. And so that's a key part of sort of our first year or two of operation, is getting that underway.
I think it's very exciting. Do you have any sort of long-range goals or plans?
Absolutely. I think the biggest one is someday to have a museum. I went to a wonderful fundraising event that the archives did a couple of years back, and that the little exercise was for people to look at an object or a photograph and say, well, is this in a library or an archives or a museum? And that's part of really the origin story for the Historical Society. Is there's a lot of significant objects and art and things that you want to be able to share with people, and a museum is the right setting to do that. And so we've got, a museum for the Ross family, and you can certainly learn important things in the Sheriff Andrews house. But long term, we'd love to see a place where the full history of Quanasquamcook and St. Andrews can be presented.
Yeah, I think that is a missing link here, and I think that there's a lot of interest in that kind of thing. And now that I think of it, the rooms that are the most popular, say over on Minister's Island, often are the ones that talk about history that they don't know about.
Yes.
And Van Horn's history is a complete package, but the introduction of how did the Passamaquoddy fit into the whole thing is another. I still think that the clams that are in the bar along the bar are the best that you can get, and they knew this 9,000 years ago. So
there's no question. And the Passamaquoddy, both in Maine and in St. Andrews, have some very impressive historical stories to tell. We're hoping that we will be able to have a program featuring Dwayne Toma talking about the wax cylinders, which are the first recordings of First Nations ever made, and it was done in Calais from the Passamaquoddy. And Dwayne is one of the youngest speakers of the Passamaquoddy language, so we're really hopeful that the St. Andrews Historical Society will be able to have that as a presentation soon.
I imagine that there are probably a lot of artifacts in people's houses that they have maybe held on to waiting for a repository to surface. And because the archives, people don't generally, it's not something that you go and see. You can research things there, but it's not a site particularly. I mean, the jail is, and that's freaky enough. But the courthouse is gorgeous.
Yep.
But there isn't any place that you can go to see St. Andrews historical stuff.
It's there. I'm sure it is still there. A lot of it was brought in 1783 when the Loyalists arrived. There are things that arrived over the next 200 years, but it's there, and I think you're right that a lot of them are objects that people know are priceless in the sense that they can't be replaced, and they don't want to part with, but sharing it with somebody is perfect. So if we can do that down the road and be the facility where those things are preserved and stored, it does add something other than the paper and photographic and digital services that you have with the archives. Together, I think they preserve and present the history.
I'm wondering whether or not there is a tie-in with the schools where they could learn. I just have been doing some genealogy work, and I know a lot of people come to St. Andrews for the same purpose. And I imagine, having spoken to a number of young folks who they don't know who their ancestors are, like they don't know the names of their great-grandfathers. And this might give them an opportunity to find out more about their background and increase their interest in more discovery, which I think is always helpful. Curiosity is a difficult thing to bring about, but I think that this might be a way to do it.
I'm sure you're correct. I think getting into the schools with the right presentation historically is a wonderful thing. We're talking about doing that with the archives. The archives now has one of the replicas of the 1760 Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and bringing that into a classroom to explain the story is a wonderful lesson. And with respect to genealogy, my own father got me interested in his family history in Pennsylvania and Italy. It was when I began researching my mother's history in St. Andrews and Deer Island and New Brunswick that I really fell in love with it. And it's not so very hard to do. With a little bit of information and some guidance, somebody who's in 10th grade or 11th grade can suddenly see where their family's coming from.
I remember when I first started in doing genealogy, I was probably 10 with my grandmother, and back in those days you had to trot down to the New York Genealogical Society and page through things. Today, with myheritage.com or whichever site you want to use, you push a button and you can find out all kinds of information, including articles about people.
Articles and photographs, and it always feels like cheating because Ancestry, which I use, will show you all the work that other people have done in the family. And so you can quickly find connections that you never could have explored on your own. Yeah. My father did it the old-fashioned way, going to churches and town halls and confirming details.
Yeah,
the resources now are amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So for people who are interested in history, specifically St. Andrew's history, how can they get involved with the society? And are you looking for volunteers? Are you looking for board members? Are you looking for stuff? Chairs to read on or lights to illuminate?
Yes to all of those questions. We're kind of excited now to try to furnish the room at the Windsor House. We've gotten a couple of tables that were originally in the china chest, which I think are ideal. But yes, we're going to be looking for good, comfortable reading chairs, old bookcases, and maybe a couple of good, comfortable chairs. Sure, we'll look for those things, but it's the volunteers, I think, that are most critical. I mentioned the street party we're planning. Yeah, we're going to reach out. We have about almost 100 charter members, so we're off to a good start. And we'll reach out through our emails to those members to say, hey, would you like to take 5 minutes to talk about what it means to be living on Ernest Street and who Ernest is and those kinds of questions. I discovered that there's, I think, 2 children that didn't get a street named after them, including Amelia. And so that's my daughter's name. I'm going to do a little research on why Amelia didn't get a street named.
Well, I think something should be done about that. There's more land.
Yes.
That's amazing. So, will you have a website, a social media presence? Can people add comments or items that they might have tucked away in either their brains or their drawers that might illuminate more history of the town?
Absolutely. I think we've got the domain name reserved and working to try to find the right people to help build those things. To do it right obviously requires some real effort, but we're very determined to try to focus as a volunteer organization. And I think I mentioned early on, we want it to be fun. My own experience in the volunteer world is if people enjoy themselves while they're volunteering, there's nothing they won't try to accomplish. So we're excited at that possibility.
Well, I think it's great. So going back to your own personal interest in this, because it didn't just start as a whim. You probably have some deep-seated interest in history, and I'm just wondering, how did you gather the original founding members together, and what are their interests in helping you with this organization?
Well, there are people that I came to know in St. Andrews. One is a cousin from my Deer Island connection, and all of them kind of at times had indicated through just informal conversations an interest in history. So we're looking for more board members, but we've got a wonderful team of I think 6 or 7 at this point helping us, and sort of will begin sort of more formal meetings, although they'll be informal around a table, I think, in January. And as I said, I think we've got so many ideas that we want to pursue. It's going to be a challenge for us to stay on track.
Well, I think once people get wind of this organization, you're going to have a lot of people who are suddenly going to come out of the woodwork with, did you know about my great-grandfather? And those are the kinds of stories that if we as a town can harness either by recording interviews or that sort of thing. It's very difficult to do, but I remember, because it's not done enough.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a show years ago where someone interviewed a number of people from Harvey. And it was fascinating listening to the old stories about, well, what went on in that, and so I think this is a great opportunity.
Well, we're, part of my original motivation was focused on, I was impressed with the Loyalist connection, and I've been to Castine, and so the story of how the people in Castine came to St. Andrews was always of interest to me. But through my research about the treaty and getting a better understanding of the history of the First Nations, it's really not an event that you would celebrate. It's an event you can commemorate, the arrival of the Loyalists. And the other big lesson to me was coming to appreciate that the Loyalists who were coming, they weren't settlers in the traditional sense. These were war refugees. These were people whose lives and homes were being threatened. And some of them had moved 2 or 3 times already. So, I mean, who else is going to show up in St. Andrews in October with nothing except the hope to be safe? It was not a moment of joy. I'm sure it was a very sad chapter. But what was born out of that history is the town of St. Andrews as we know it. So I think those pieces of history are what are intriguing, worth learning about, worth remembering.
So, Brett, can you think of what's one of the most unusual stories that has surfaced in your research about the town?
Well, the Francis Wren map has got some fascinating vignettes in the history of the town. One of them that always caught my eye was that an ox was roasted in Market Square to celebrate the coronation of Queen Victoria. So I'm thinking that, maybe one of these Octobers, when we want to have a big event, we'll try to do that. So I've asked David Welch to explore that possibility. He's one of our directors. And by tradition, that was done, and it was fed to the community.
Yes.
You had to get a permit from the king to roast an ox. So it's a traditional thing done. And so, as I said earlier, we'd like to make our events fun. We'd love to have people go, oh, the Historical Society, well, they're always entertaining when they do some event like that. So that would be great.
Well, different coronation events and commemorations for different jubilees have been a big hit here. And so I think that this sounds like one that would be equally exciting. When we started when we first opened the Windsor House, we had on Victoria weekend, we had a Queen Victoria lookalike contest. People came from miles away to enter. I mean, and a man, Glenn Carter, won the first year. And by the time, I don't know if you knew Glenn, but by the time he got back to the West Coast where he was a practicing professional, his office had been repainted Glenn Queensley Carter instead of Glenn Kingsley Carter.
That's neat. The Loyalist history in the town is important, but it's obviously not the only part of the town, and there's so many other stories that we can tell. One of the things we're looking forward to doing is having our own book group to sit in front of the fire at the Windsor House and select the right historical novel. Grace Helen Mowatt's book about the history of St. Andrews is really one of the introductions I've had to the area. Yeah. So we're excited because there's so many different possibilities and things we can explore. A scavenger hunt is one idea we're looking at, a historical scavenger hunt.
That's a great way to get multiple generations involved. Exactly. Everybody loves a scavenger hunt.
Yes, exactly. So that's on the list. And you asked earlier, what can we use? And there's a job for every volunteer who's interested in doing something. So no formalities.
Thank you, Brett, for coming on the show today, and I look forward to finding out what your progress is in another 6 or 8 months, and I'm sure it's going to be exciting. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this show, and I look forward to seeing you on another episode of Fundy Tidings.